Okay, comrades, take two. So you're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. The Workers' International Network is a forum where we discuss Marxist ideas, and the discussions are led by activists in the labour movement. And the idea is to spread the influence of Marxism and to expand left-wing forces in the various countries in which our comrades are involved. Our discussion tonight centres on India, and we're fortunate to have the speaker, Maya John, who is a labour activist, who's involved, she's a Marxist theoretician also, and she's involved in organising workers across a number of areas, domestic workers, nurses, teachers. She writes about labour history, and she's also the General Secretary of the Indian Association of Women's Studies, and she teaches at the University of Delhi. One of the few gains which we've made in recent times against the right has been in India. There's an increasing confidence in the right amongst right-wing leaders across the world. The United States is one example, France is another, and of course there's Putin in Russia. But one of the few gains we can claim now is Modi. Modi was expecting a 2/3 majority in the recent elections, and he's ended up having lost a huge number of seats and is no longer the dominant force. At one stage, he saw himself as divinely appointed to lead the Indian people, and that claim is now being punctured. Now, it's an important gain for all of us. So any victory for any group of workers anywhere is a victory for us all. Now, I'm sure Moya will deal with all these questions, such as the big strikes since 2020, the General Federation of Unions calling several strikes, the huge farmers' strikes, and the result of this activity is what led to the defeat of Modi. There are particular issues which Moya will go into, including constitutional rights, economic hardship, stoking of religious polarization, issues about division between the Indian and Muslim populations, which Modi built his base around. We also need, in the course of discussion, to remind ourselves of the role of British imperialism in all of this. The Indian subcontinent was divided cynically by the divide and rule policies of British imperialism, and a huge cost was paid in terms of the people of the subcontinent. 2 million people died in 1946-47 period, in the period of partition. And the partition itself arose from a cynical endeavour by British imperialism to stimulate what was then the Muslim League in order to weaken the influence of the Congress Party. And that divide and rule policy has been used by British imperialism across many, many countries. Myself, I'm from Ireland, and they used that tactic in trying to divide Protestant from Catholic workers, so we're well used to it. But the cost paid by the workers of India and Pakistan was enormous. Millions of people losing their lives, millions of others refugees, and then the ethnic cleansing of cities. So part of the discussion will obviously steer in the direction of placing the blame for these divisions on the role of imperialism, how they were able to use local tribal chiefs, princedoms, and local area leaders to support their interests in India. And as I say, it's not just India, but that divide and rule policy has been pursued. But I'm sure Moya will go into all of that. Now, we're privileged to have a speaker of Moya's status. When she finishes her opening contribution, there'll be plenty of time for discussions to raise issues that they want to develop or argue about. They'll be trying to come back into discussion, and Moya will have an opportunity at the end to summarize the entire discussion, but also maybe halfway through the points that have been raised, she may wish to come in to generate some ideas around the issues that comrades raise. So after Moya speaks, there'll be plenty of time for discussion, and comrades can use the electronic hand to indicate to me that they wish to speak. So without further ado, we'll now introduce Maya John to the meeting. Maya, go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
I thank the Workers' International Network for organizing this discussion and for providing me this opportunity to speak amongst fellow revolutionary comrades. Before proceeding, I would like to begin by paying homage to the great rebellion waged by the indigenous group, the Santals, against British colonial rule Today is actually the 169th year of the outbreak of this rebellion. It was organized in opposition to the exploitative zamindari system introduced in the region by the East India Company, which actually robbed the Santals of their land, forcing them into a position of bonded servitude to zamindars and moneylenders. It was a very important struggle that asserted the claim to self-rule. Taking inspiration from this, let us enter into the deliberation on the political question which is plaguing India. Now, India's 18th general election, comrades, was conducted within the given system of representative democracy, but there was palpable discontent against the established coordinates of power. So any analysis of Indian democracy and elections also demands the development of a concrete critique of it. This way, I believe we come to know better about the problems and the prospects of going beyond the prevailing structure of formal representative democracy. I hope that this approach actually represents what Marx argued in German ideology of communism being the real movement, which destroys the existing state of being. It is indeed imperative for revolutionary communists to deliberate on how the roots for concrete alternatives can be found in the present constellation. And so as we assess, the results of the general elections in India and engagement with the structures of representative democracy become crucial. This is not simply because, India is got a voting population of 970 million, which is larger than the population of all European countries of Europe combined, as well as, much larger than the electorate of the United States, Russia, or other South Asian countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan. But also because periodic elections in India actually reveal the entrenched presence of electoral autocracy, a point which I aim to flesh out in this presentation. Representative democracy, as it exists in many parts of the world today, it is a colonial construct. In the colonial context, it served to propel native elites into positions of power brokering with colonial authorities. Hence, for a long time, the edifice of representative democracy was actually built on property-based franchise, expensive elections, and uneven carving out of electoral constituencies, which together allowed basically the wealthy to dominate the formation of representative, so-called representative institutions like legislative assemblies, legislative councils, and so on. In other words, explicit rules of polity and institutional setups were actually erected as effective trenches around property and privilege of the dominant sections and colonial power. Even after the transfer of power from the colonial elite to the native elites, the basic structure with certain cosmetic changes persists. In this way, the inner core of representative democracy remains consistent in terms of alienating the power of people and transferring that power to political institutions like presidencies, parliaments, and cabinets, on whose functioning the people have, at the end of the day, very little control. To understand this aspect better, let us turn to a closer examination of India's 2024 general election. The second term of the Narendra Modi-led government from 2019 to 24 was a government that was corrupt to the core and ruled by dividing people. This propelled the liberal opinion that India was on the cusp of the most critical election in her history. There was a lot of frustration with the growing misuse of institutions and the general repressive crackdown on different movements was something that was very palpable. Many saw the 2024 election as a crucial opportunity for safeguarding the country's constitution and her institutions. Ironically, such views have overlooked that the present ruling dispensation, be it Modi 2.0, that's the government from 2019 to 24, or Modi 3.0, which has just come to power, are actually ruling dispensations that have come to power by primarily using the electoral system enshrined in the provisions and the working of the very same constitution and established institutions. This is not to dismiss that there was no cause for alarm as we drew closer and closer to this election. Of course, capitalizing on the electoral machinery and combining this with the regular, very regular use of stormtroopers from multiple Hindu majoritarian mass organizations, the ruling bloc led by the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, has facilitated the deepening of a totalitarian system in India. Now, against this aforementioned backdrop of, deepening totalitarianism in the country, of course, the results of the election of 2024 reflect that the majority of people of India have rejected the divisive agenda of communal and casteist politics of the BJP. Widespread anger against the Modi regime has actually steadily grown, especially during Narendra Modi's second term from 2019 to 24. The public anger, which came to inform the election in 2024, has actually been the result of the Modi regime's concrete failure to address the issues which have seriously affected the vast majority of Indian people. These are key issues such as skyrocketing inflation, massive unemployment among the youth, the lack of dignified jobs, and intensifying rural and farmers' distress. Sensing the rise of, public anger, the BJP tried to, manage some kind of damage control during this election by resorting to aggressive, communal campaigns, as well as brazen misuse of the mainstream media, state machinery, and even some would say the election commission. Despite cancelling the tickets of close to 100 of its sitting members of parliament, the BJP still failed to gain a majority on its own. Notably, at least 13 of the union ministers who were fielded in this general election were ceremoniously defeated. Even Narendra Modi's margin of victory from the constituency Varanasi, where he stood from, and where the constituency's voters were literally, voting either for or against the sitting prime minister, we see the margin of victory hovered at a lackluster 150,000 votes against the second best performing candidate in the constituency. It is the lowest victory margin for a sitting prime minister ever in India. In real terms, the assertion, by common people of their issues and the economic anxiety about growing economic disparity have triggered the drop in the BJP's vote share from 37.36% in 2019 to 36.56% in the 2024 general election. Further, the biggest losses for the BJP came to be reported from the rural constituencies, where economic distress propelled strong anger against the party. Likewise, the vote share of the ruling National Democratic Alliance, of which the BJP is a part, fell from 43% in 2019 to around 41% in this 2024 election. This means that more than 59% voters in India have emphatically rejected the National Democratic Alliance regime by voting for other political parties. Now, this point has to be something to be recognized, has to be highlighted, that only 41% people wanted continuity, while 59% voted for change. However, earlier this month, we know the NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, led by the BJP, successfully formed the central government, albeit a minority government, with a majority pegged at 293 seats out of the 543 elected seats in the lower house of the parliament, also known as the Lok Sabha. Herein, I argue that, we can see a twist in this election. The BJP did not get the 400 plus or the 2/3 majority, seats as they aggressively projected. And instead, the party hovered at 238 seats, well short of the margin of majority, that's 272. However, the BJP still has its hand on the levers of power. In this way, the election results for me and for many activists here represent a twist and not necessarily a turning point. This brings me to a closer engagement with the issue of electoral autocracy. Notably, in the debates on Indian polity, it has been variously argued that the country lacks substantive democracy, in which the interests of and the aspirations of economically and socially vulnerable groups can be ensured. However, there appears to be a general consensus that the country enjoys a well-placed procedural democracy, aligning how periodic elections have actually failed to represent the popular will. A closer examination of election results reveals a deep paradox. Even though the vast majority of people usually vote for change, they are repeatedly slammed with continuity and the return to power of ruling regimes in which they have no confidence. So long-term trends of elections in India reveal the striking fact that despite the larger majority voting against the incumbents, the working of the electoral system prevents people from deposing them from power. When we look at the Constituent Assembly, which framed the Indian Constitution, it was a body based on a 1946 election conducted by the British. And it was based on, the property franchise, in which the electorate was a mere 7%, and that too 7% of the population of British India. The princely states in India did not even have an election, and the Indian princes got to nominate their representatives to the Constituent Assembly. Now, parallelly, while this process is happening, in the 1940s, there were huge movements being led by impoverished peasants, by workers across British India, and even in the princely states. And we have, the huge and very impactful Telangana struggle, the Tebhaga struggle, etc. And interestingly, the first universal franchise operationalized in the revolutionary assemblies and parallel, proto-governments that these radical peasant and workers movements threw up. Of course, these movements were brutally crushed by the early post-colonial state and brushed aside conveniently from India's history. What the Indian Constitution encapsulated as the aspirations and demands of the common people were actually in real terms relegated to the non-justiciable section of the Indian Constitution. It's known as the directive principles. In this way, the exercise of constitution framing and the institutions that it then put in force proved to be a farce. And the electoral process which unfolded came to be a farcical repetition. Why is that? Well, notably, the 17 general elections conducted between 1951 and 2019 secured, well, now 2024 also, secured continuity for the incumbent governments in nearly 2/3 of the cases, while in just about 1/3 of cases has a regime change materialized. A similar pattern can be seen in most of the provincial or state level assembly elections. The skewed modus operandi of the electoral system in India renders crores of electors as defeated people. The defeat of candidates who trail behind winning candidates, whatever the margin, translates into the defeat of the large number of people who believed in other candidates than the one declared the winner. To elucidate, I'll spell out some very revealing examples from recent, provincial or state level elections, and from the 2019 general election and the 2024 general election. So my first example is from Uttar Pradesh 2022, 10th March, when the Uttar Pradesh Assembly election results were declared. By the evening, amidst the cacophony arising from the newsrooms in India, the claim was that, that the Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath from the BJP was returning to power with a thumping majority. A closer scrutiny of the results revealed a completely different picture. Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state of the country, despite divisive casteism and communal politics holding sway, saw a whopping figure of 60% people voting decisively against Yogi's party, the BJP. So the majority of people who voted did not want Yogi to return to power. They wanted change. And still, the given peculiar system of first past the post elections, Yogi's party, with its limited vote share, went on to claim a second term in office. The second example is a case of Dhampur constituency, again, Uttar Pradesh Assembly election of 2022. Here, close to 61% people voted against the winning candidate. and yet their votes counted as nothing due to the peculiar system of winner takes it all. Meanwhile, a party in the same UP, provincial election of 2022, which received a total of 13% vote share, ended up getting just one seat out of 403, which is, merely 0.2%, representation in the UP Assembly. Example 3 is the 2019 general election. The Machli Sheher constituency in, again, Uttar Pradesh, saw the winning candidate claim victory via wafer thin margin of just 181 votes, disregarding as a consequence the choice of nearly 500,000 people who voted against him. Example 4 is from the 2024 recently concluded general election. The BJP-backed Shiv Sena candidate from Mumbai Northwest constituency won by a meager 48 votes. Shockingly, the second best performing rival candidate from the same constituency garnered 0.452596 million votes, all of which have no say. Those votes went waste. Taken together, these instances well expose that of the many votes polled in India's elections, a massive number of votes go waste, which amounts to those people having no voice in terms of their representation. So much for an electoral system that is touted as a great conduit of expression of the people's will. The farcical repetition of the electoral defeat of the large majorities, and I just mentioned that 2/3 of the cases from 1951, we're seeing the comeback of into power of incumbent governments. Now, this trend has been justified on the grounds of the opposition vote being splintered, a divided one, thereby enhancing the propensity for the return of power of ruling incumbent dispensation. However, whether the index of oppositional unity is maximum or minimum, it is impossible to dispute the fact that the majority of voters are often not in support of the person or party being installed as their de jure representative. And yet, this long-standing reality of the electoral system in India is continuously downplayed. Taken as eternally given, the process of representation is considered almost like a holy cow that is beyond any, a sacred cow that is beyond any evaluation. Once the electoral system is taken as a given and beyond any kind of reproach, the liberals, of course, end up condemning the Indian voter as being culturally backward, quote unquote irrational, quote unquote failing to choose the better representative. This is, according to me, nothing but pervasive victim blaming. Now, installed as de jure and sole representatives of both their supporters and non-supporters in an electoral constituency, the 543 winning candidates in the lower house of the parliament are said to take up their responsibility as representatives of their constituencies. However, the concrete functioning of the parliamentary system makes this a false claim. Here again, we are confronted by one of the deepest flaws and paradoxes of the representative system. Elections do not facilitate the right of all elected representatives to make laws for the people, given the dominance of the ruling bloc over decision-making and policy framing. In real terms, India's electoral, quote-unquote, democracy boils down to the arithmetic by which the political party or electoral coalition with seats amounting to 50% plus 1, that's 272 seats out of 543 in the case of the Lok Sabha, enjoys a near monopoly over decision-making in the legislature. Consequently, if elected representatives are not part of the ruling bloc, they are distanced from the powers to formulate laws. This apart, the ruling bloc can also use their majority to remove opposition members from participating in the proceedings of the parliament, as evident in the record high number of suspensions of opposition members of parliament or MPs during the December 2023 winter session of the Lok Sabha or the lower house of the parliament. To elucidate further, the continuing hold on power of the present BJP-led ruling bloc, that's Modi 3.0, is evident in the second term of the notorious Om Birla, the Minister of Parliament Om Birla, who's got the second term as Speaker of the House. He actually expelled nearly half of the opposition leaders from the December 2023 winter session. We also see the repeat of several other contentious BJP ministers in various ministerial posts. Further, Given the monetary might of the ruling BJP, we can expect them to easily buy out the so-called undependable elected representatives. This is a trick actually that the BJP has nurtured and mastered over the last decade in terms of breaking and buying off regional parties. It is said that under the present representative system, people transfer their power to political institutions like legislative assemblies and parliaments. Millions of people are simply summoned, therefore, to cast their vote, and then immediately they are relegated to oblivion and passivity. The hierarchy between rulers and the rule remains fiercely intact, and so has the perpetual possibility of getting betrayed. Ultimately, then, more than democracy, it is an electoral autocracy that prevails and orients the country's political life, and this has been the case for a long time. It's not just specific to this last 10 years of Modi rule. Repeatedly, the winning candidates are propelled to the position to rule over the people, including the large majorities of defeated people who have not voted for them. These representatives become a power unto themselves who represent their constituency more or less the way they please. A major consequence of such absolute power is the intrinsic tendency to misuse state institutions directly or indirectly, and to clamp down on the rights of the defeated people to resist and oppose. This trend has grown rapidly in the past decade. We are in fact witnessing the growth of a totalitarian system as electoral autocracy effectively combines forces with the tendency of the ruling party to crush dissent by using police forces as well as quasi-militias instilled with the spirit of Hindu majoritarianism, cyberbullying of citizens expressing critical views on ground realities, the heckling of teachers and students who question the attack on the academic autonomy of educational institutions, the repeated use of strong-arm tactics, repressive measures, including advanced surveillance technology like drones against protest demonstrations, multiple police cases against leading activists and journalists, and so on, have become the new order of the day. Many arrested in recent years are still languishing in jail, awaiting trial under several draconic laws. Ironically, the so-called rights to free speech and freedom of association, which are supposedly fundamental rights, have long existed in the country, albeit with several riders, that now increasingly allow the ruling camp to curb these basic freedoms on the obnoxiously flimsy grounds of quote-unquote law and order. Correspondingly, people are so-called free to raise their voice only if their actions do not amount to real subversion of the order of things, which benefits the powers that be. Within the institutions of formal representative democracy in India, I would say little has changed since 2024, since the election results came out and we saw the BJP being reduced to a position of steering a minority government. Hence, I would say we still see that the passage of the 3 new draconic criminal laws, replacing the Indian Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the Indian Evidence Act, as on 1st July 2024, has still failed to be rolled back. To conclude, I'd say that, of course, this is not to argue that the situation is very, pessimistic and beyond any redemption. In fact, there are rising opportunities. After all, we must recognize that almost 60% of the Indian electorate are not with the ruling bloc. And in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, the country has seen a 3-fold increase in protests of different kinds, including labor unrest, though, of course, fragmented. However, this, oppositional force fails to be consolidated by the parliamentary oppositional parties because of these parties' lack of ideological underpinnings and rampant political cronyism amongst them. I think this is clearly evident in the fact that, barring a few states or provinces, the oppositional bloc known as the India Alliance was unable to reach an electoral arrangement on seat sharing. Moreover, amongst the leaders of the various political parties of whatever color and hue, there is a consensus on many issues of policy. A euphoria, of course, surely exists with respect to the BJP losing a majority in the parliament. We now see a more emboldened parliamentary opposition at work. This will possibly change the power balance between the different forces in the country, a condition which must be tapped by social movements to augment their own capacity to resist the economic and political elites' onslaught on the needs and aspirations of the common people. However, it still has to be seen how the parliamentary opposition will capitalize on the pulse of anti-incumbency that has resolutely challenged the corporate-owned Godi media's narrative of there is no alternative, TINA, as we know. More importantly, I would say the wider social basis of the opposition requires to be tapped by different social movements so as to expand their ideological counter-hegemony and for deepening the social base of different organizations. Evidently, the key issues of unemployment, inflation, casteism, and divisive communal politics, which ignited the 2024 general elections, as well as the scores of other crucial issues like diminishing labor rights, privatization of education and healthcare, and so on, which gained inadequate limelight during the election fever, have to be raised with intensified vigor and commitment. Further, people's movements of the most exploited and oppressed sections of the Indian masses need to evolve strategies to develop a new ideological direction and alternative basis of their political power, which alone, I believe, can herald a new era of equality and justice for all. I look forward to your comments and I could elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amaya, for a very stimulating and a very, very interesting contribution. And you've covered a range of issues, some of which affect us all: unemployment, inflation, alienation. But you made a particular examination of the way the electoral system and the so-called democratic system, which is formally open to be influenced by people, can be used bureaucratically to inhibit the growth of opposition movements within society. That's an interesting point which we need to examine. Anyway, there's a lot of issues which you have raised. I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of things people will want to say. So if anybody wants to contribute, could it just indicate using the electronic hand? And I'll watch the screen here for any indications. And it's open from now, so I don't see any. If I don't see your hand for some reason, Matthew, your hand is up there. I was going to say, if I don't see your hand for some reason, you can just wave your hand around on the screen. But anyway, Matthew, there you go.
I was desperately trying to write down some notes, but it seems nobody else wanted to speak. Anyway, I think there's a few things I would like to raise. I mean, first of all, obviously, is the explosive social background in India. I mean, we've seen in the last few years some of the biggest general strikes, if not the biggest general strikes in history in India. We've seen, obviously, things like the farmers besieging Delhi for months, getting in conflict with the cops, etc., etc. Obviously, the resistance to the anti-Muslim laws, etc., discrimination, all the rest of it. So it's been a really incredible period in those terms, in terms of fighting capacity of the workers and the oppressed. The interesting and somewhat depressing thing, of course, is the political point that comes from that. The fact that what we get, Indian politics on the left is still dominated, of course, by Stalinism, by assorted varieties of the Communist Party, and those Communist parties, of course, allied, whether that's the CPI, the CPIM, or even the Maoists, the CPI-ML, allied themselves with, electorally and politically, with the corrupt and degenerate bourgeois forces of the Congress and the sorted Janata Dal and the sorted other forces, many of which are actually sort of murderously anti-working class. I mean, have a history of actual killings in sorted conflicts, etc. But yet, there is no independence, there is no political independence of the working class. It's by these forces have been tied to these horrible excrescences and degenerate outfits. And so, really, I mean, you can see, for that, you can see, okay, well, this is why we're seeing the expression we are of, in terms of the political impasse. Politically, we're not seeing the working class producing its own expression, its own political party, independent of any of this other nonsense and reaction. And the question really is, are there any forces moving towards, breaking away from all this stuff and independently producing a voice for the working class and against, obviously, bourgeois rule itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. See, John and Dominic Byrne have indicated.
Yeah. John Byrne speaking. It's partly to follow on from Matthew. I mean, the reports we get in Europe about India speak, of some fairly horrific practices that have occurred. For instance, particularly, I think it's probably among small farmers, there seems to have been a whole spate of suicides that have been linked up with money lenders, and if you like, small farmers not being able to, how can one put it, make a decent living for themselves and their families. You've also had, I think it's tied in with the massive strikes of the farmers, attempts by, if you like, the Indian bourgeois to bring in Western practices, particularly in retail, bringing in supermarkets against, the sort of market economies that you have in India at the present time. And on top of that, Narendra Modi went out of his way, with the building of that temple, and really, sort of bolstering Hindu nationalism of the worst kind in India. And again, I think the election was putting a halt on Narendra Modi, of saying, that most Indian people did not want to know, if you like, communal violence and, the sort of stirring up of hatred that he represented. But again, I think, to echo what I think was one of Matthew's points, is the real need for a party of the working class. Because going into the election and listening to commentators like in Europe about India, it came over that the Congress had a very lackluster approach and more or less were giving Narendra Modi a free run. And it wasn't Congress that halted him, although they were beneficiaries to Narendra Modi's halts on his progress to making India into some form of dictatorship, a bit like we have probably in America with Donald Trump wanting to make America into a dictatorship. So it's really asking what has been done in India, or what is happening in India with regard to the building of a democratic, labour-orientated party or political movement. Because at the moment, it does seem, although Narendra Modi has been defeated, he's had a halt put on him, he's going into coalitions with parties. And one of the commentators said that one of the good points about the parties he's going into coalition with is the fact that it depends on Muslim voters. So that will put a halt to his, if you like, communal violence that he seemed to have thrived on for the last, I don't know how many years, long before he became Prime Minister. I forget which state it was, but where he was the head of that state, and that was his, if you like, diet, was just to stir up communal violence between Hindu and Muslim. So I'll leave it at that, really basically asking what is happening in terms of the labour movement in India in building a political voice, because we've seen from the strikes that have taken place that there's a real willingness to organise and to fight for workers' rights, particularly from the farmers. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. The next speaker to indicate is Roger.
Yes, thank you. I see. Before I make my points, I just like to point out there are. It's really heartening to see so many Indian comrades here. I reckon 25 to 30 comrades in total, and there's one comrade has put a question in the chat. So I think it might be better if we allow, well, for that question to be answered, and also for other comrades to be, I would particularly encourage comrades to come in with your questions and points. I have a number of points that I'd like to make, but I think really the Indian comrades should have priority. So I'd just like to invite any other comrades who want to speak.
So you want to postpone your contribution, Roger, to later then?
Yeah, if there
Yeah.
are any Indian comrades who would like to speak first, but there
Yes.
is one who has asked a question already, which is in the chat. He didn't want to speak, but he's posed his question in writing.
Yes. Yeah, I understand. That's a very important point. So Indian comrades will be particularly welcome. I notice on the screen lots of comrades from India. So if maybe at this point we want to ask Moya to maybe briefly deal with some of the issues that came up. I just want to ask a question myself about the Samajwadi Party, which is a socialist party, I believe, which took votes from the BJP. I didn't know about this party previously, but maybe Maya can enlighten us a bit. It's known as a socialist party, and it's picking up votes amongst the lower class in India. Does any other comrade want to ask? Oh, Ian has indicated at this point.
I will.
Go ahead, Ian. I think you're muted, Ian. You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick question or observation from afar on our own campaign trail at the moment against both the resurgent far right of Farage and the right wing of the Tories, and a centrist Labour operation that at this stage seems very much likely to win, unless all the polls are hugely wrong. But I suppose the polls were almost equally wrong about the Modi landslide, and they'd have to be if we don't get a Starmer one. And it was interesting, the narrative was already being spun that this is the fault of, I saw somebody literally say this in so many words on Twitter, usually it's more dog whistled, Congress supporting liberal centrist type. This is because the masses are backward, that it doesn't matter about their material interests. They'll always vote for communalism and hatred of the other, and there's nothing we can do about that. And when the actual results came out, all the pollsters and pundits on one show that was actually broadcast over here as a kind of clip on the news were traumatized because they'd been proven so wrong. Even if by the liberal elite urban versus backward poor kind of narrative that's been spun, none of them would be Modi supporters themselves. So actually, given Modi's own policies and some of the actual polling, he does have a bit more of a base with the rich than some of that narrative would let on. And it seems also that he's been seen through by a lot more of the masses, ordinary people, the poor, after 10 years of not delivering, just like Congress before him didn't deliver. So just a question about that, the way it's played out and spun sometimes in this culture war that regular people, poor people, are irredeemably bigoted, and the right are rising with people voting against their own self-interests. And the irony that in this case, not only did that not happen, but the people that benefited in terms of the Congress opposition were the biggest trumpeters of this nonsense. So as the last contributor was saying, they kind of won despite themselves because of this pushback against Modi. So what are the prospects for that and for a better opposition based on the mass workers and peasant struggles to leapfrog the Congress to be the real challenge at the political level as well in the next period? Thanks.
Thank you. And it's open for comrades from India who want to speak or to enlighten us about some of the issues that have been raised. So, okay, then at this point, Moya might want to deal briefly with some of the points, and then we'll come back to the discussion and Roger after that. So, Moya, do you want to deal with some of the issues at this stage?
Yes, please. Just some quick observations. See, many of the questions that have come, they reflect, a certain kind of reading of this particular election that happened. And we can go into the specificities of, this particular 2024 election. But I think for all of us here, what we really need to engage with is the paradigm within which election after election is happening, Then I think we'll make more sense of what is it that, where is the key to India's revolution? Where does that lie? Now, the first thing that, what I think that I've tried to, put out there for all of us to deliberate on is the fact that, the current form of representative democracy in India or many other parts of the world, it's not the final form. It's not the final form or the best that it can get, and that is, in fact, if we get too tied down to, exploring or working with this, that, within the given system of, electoral democracy, representative democracy, we can, carve out the necessary, counter hegemony and the alternative. Well, we know that is that will be hitting, ourselves against the wall, simply because when we look at, just take this analogy, what are we expecting from the particular paradigm of elections as enshrined, in the modern polity of so many states, modern states like India or otherwise? If we're expecting like a mouse going into labor and having or giving birth to an elephant, not possible, not possible at all. So obviously we cannot expect something from the system which it cannot give. Overall, the current, nature of electoral representative democracy is to perpetuate, the rule of capital. And that is why I kept saying in this presentation that while the majority, almost 60% in the case of India, is voting for change, they're slapped repeatedly and farcically with, the repetition or the coming back of incumbent governments. So given this nature, this paradigm within which, representative democracy functions in its given form, and therefore the need to think of an alternative form of democracy, then brings us to the question of, what is to be done and where does, as I said, the key to the Indian revolution lie? And here I'd like to quickly respond to some of the questions that have come with respect to, strikes, with respect to the farmers' protests, lengthy farmers' protests, how parliamentary left parties in India are conducting themselves, and where does the alternative revolutionary party scope lie? I would say that, let me just quickly take the question of, the farmers' movement. The farmers' movement, yes, was a huge and prolonged movement. It did, attack the Modi 2.0 government in a very, very significant way. However, the farmers' movement, we have to remember, is also divided. It is a divided movement. And I think many comrades here are aware about that. Half of the rural masses in India are actually what we call landless agrarian workers, whose issues are yet to be articulated and brought in, from the fringes to the forefront of the movement against, agro corporates and other anti, rural poor policies of this ruling bloc. So that's, there is that concern there. And of course, where would the revolutionary left and communists anchor their, struggle amongst the rural poor? It would obviously be, critical of the current format of the farmers' movement and, align itself to the agrarian landless labor, trend more significantly. When it comes to the workers' movement, yes, India has witnessed strikes, and I did mention in the last 3 or 4 years in particularly the Modi 2.0 or second term of Modi's government, there was an escalation of a lot of labor protests. We even saw the call of certain general strikes. But I would say that, those struggles of workers in India have not necessarily congealed themselves, in a way that would prove, truly anti-systemic. The strikes, including the general strikes that we've seen in the last few years, are very fragmented. And I would say that, we tend to, participate in these strikes, and we often, work, with the sense that, it was victorious, the strike was victorious, which actually reflects that, we are stuck somewhere within our own closed, echo chamber, where we're assuming a victory for a strike, including a general strike, whereas the majority of Indian workers are still working, during that strike. And, I would say that ironically, the workers who can still be seen, forced to work on periods of strike are the most exploited workers. Somebody here raised a question of Anganwadi workers in India. They're part of the, larger health scheme of the country. They're the frontline, community health workers. Now, they're not even paid a salary. They're paid only honorarium. So given all different kinds of the most exploited workforces of this country, what do we see? Trade union density is minimal. That means these are the sections of workers who are actually least organized. In fact, I work in my other writings, my other scholarship on this whole idea of a triangulated relationship between India's labor market segmentation, the applicability of the labor laws, and the level of trade union density. We actually see that as you move up the labor market in India into higher segments, you will see that more labor law coverage is there, and there's higher trade union density. And therefore, I would say that, for revolutionary communists here, we can learn a lot from, I would say this again, I like drawing on fables. This time it's a Turkish fable on this very well-known wisdom man, Mullah Nasruddin, who was once looking for a key that he lost, and he was looking for it under this lamp post. And, one person passes by and asks the mullah, what are you looking for? And he said, I lost my key. So even he ends up, helping the mullah search for the key under that lamp post. Other people join in, they all ask, and they start helping Mullah Nasruddin. And then finally, when they don't find the key under the lamp post, one of them frustratedly asks, where did you last see the key? Where do you think you dropped it? And Mullah Nasruddin says, I dropped it, in the dark, one street away. Everybody looks flummoxed. They're like, why are you looking for it here then, under this lamppost? Because Mullah Nasruddin says, because, well, the light is here. No, I won't be able to look for it in the dark. So what am I getting at through this fable or this analogy is the key to India's, revolutionary party formation lies not where, organized workers are most visible. We're seeing a lot of, the most consistent strikes taking place, but where the actual interest of the revolutionary working class movement lies. And that is amongst the most exploited section of the workforce, which is least organized. So I'm saying that the gravity or the revolutionary focus, must shift to the overexploited workforce. This is not happening at the hands of, many of the parliamentary left parties. And I would say that, unless that happens, unless the gravity or revolutionary focus doesn't shift to the most overexploited section of the Indian working class, till then we will not see a reconfiguration of the actual composition of the working class in India, which is actually, this reconfiguration is very, very important to enable the process of a new revolutionary party to be formed. Only then can the working class be in a position to go beyond its present deadlock of, being trapped in this formation of representative democracy as well as rule of capital. And as I keep saying, it's, it's not going to come from within this particular form of representative democracy. And we have historically also revolutionary movements in this region have thrown up alternatives, which have proved, to have gone way beyond in terms of actual democracy vis-a-vis institutionalized ones. So I would also just quickly look at the chat box and see there's some comments here with respect to, fascism, and what does, the present, Modi government, encapsulate in terms of fascism in India. And is this another victory for fascist, forces? You see, as a historian and as an activist here in India, I'm very wary of using the concept of fascism for the particular Indian context. I find the concept has got its own specificities. It's a certain Eurocentric concept, which can historically explain a very particular historical conjuncture of the rise of totalitarianism between the two wars, the two world wars. What we're seeing in India is I would say it's something. It's a different, completely different format of more and more entrenched totalitarianism developing. And it's a history that doesn't get restricted to the last 10 years. It is a history that goes back almost 100 years. Where we've seen what I'd call the Sangh, okay, developing its tentacles very often while being outside the state system, not participating, but developing its tentacles in the larger society. So I would say yes, even today, while there's a lot of talk of whether there's fascism in India or not, I would say what we're seeing is a totalitarian regime getting entrenched in India. I would call it Sanghism. The Sangh being the right-wing notion of unity, and we're also seeing there the Sangh develop its different organizational networks. So they are there. And I'm speaking not just of recent times, for a long time. They've developed a front amongst students, amongst indigenous groups, even amongst Muslims. I would say that if there was even some kind of anti-system, some kind of struggle in a mental asylum, you would see Sanghis develop there also and develop a front there. So I would say that there's a rising Sanghism, which is actually what I'd say the highest form of totalitarian politics, which has existed so far. The Sangh, of course, aims to control not only the state, but also the social space. In fact, it reconfigures itself in the oppositional field also. Like when there is a rising discontent against the state in power, its mass organizations, the Sangh's mass organizations will be very active in opposing the state, because the agenda is to wean away people from the radical organizations. And therefore, I said we see them constantly infiltrating for many, many decades among students, workers, indigenous populations, etc. So I would just, immediately say that, the parliamentary contest, if we're talking about the elections, and of course, the defeat of a party like the BJP and its allies is, of course, very important. The defeat, of course, if it had actually happened in this case, 2024, if the BJP was defeated, it would have created a split between electoral autocracy and Sanghism. And, it would have provided much more space for fighting against Sanghism on the civil society front. So I think what we've actually seen is the second best possible outcome, which is that the nature of an electoral autocracy allowed the BJP to come in as a minority government, but definitely not to be defeated. So yeah, this is some immediate response.
Thank you. Thank you. The only comrade, see John and Dominic have indicated again. Do you, or the comrade is Roger, do you want to speak at this point, Roger? And then we'll take John or Dominic.
Yes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, I'd like to take up on that last point that Maya made. Can everybody mute, please? Because can comrade mute? Thank you. This question of fascism, first of all, I mean, I agree. Sorry, can I just mute whoever that is? Sorry, 1 second, yeah.
It's important, sorry, Roger, it's important that comrades mute their screens there. Okay.
I think I'm doing it as we're going along, but the trouble is people then leave, they rejoin and they don't remute themselves, but everybody's muted now.
Okay. Right, I wanted to take up this question of fascism first, because it's there's a lot of it's a word, as Maya said, which is bandied around a lot. But I also think that we shouldn't be so narrow in our definition to say, oh, well, it's just a phenomenon of Europe in the interwar period and so on. I think we have to go beyond that. Fascism, I have come across comrades who insisted that no other organization could be termed as fascist because, in effect, their definition of fascism is that it's a mass movement of the crazed petty bourgeois led by a man with a little moustache. And it's not. It's it's a phenomenon of representing the tensions and the desperation of the middle classes in society, and it manifests itself in different ways. But it does mean that it's mobilizing masses, non-proletarian masses, against the working class, and using specifically communal or racist concepts in order to divide and rule. And I do think that we do see a tendency. We shouldn't brush it aside. We shouldn't be over alarmist, but we shouldn't also be too complacent about it. We do see a rise worldwide of the ruling classes to move away from a kind of liberal paternalism towards a far harsher, far more divisive, and far more vicious form of rule, which does play on some of the features that of fascism. And I mean things like the development of you know, what we saw Bolsonaro in Brazil, we see, I'd say, Modi in India, we see throughout Europe, in many countries. We'll be discussing this perhaps more deeply in 2 weeks' time, when we'll be having an on-the-spot report from French comrades in relation to the current elections in France, which may very well result in big gains for the party of it was called the National Front National Rally. Is it National Rally? I think they call themselves now, the party of Le Pen. In any case, the point is, though, we have to celebrate first of all the defeat. It was. I know that I agree with Maya that the parliamentary dimension is only one part of the whole picture, and it's a very distorted part too, and so on. But nevertheless, everybody expected that Modi was going to sweep to a massive majority, probably more than a 2/3 majority, and that he would impose a Hindu theocratic constitution on India. And the fact that he was defeated is very, very significant. So I think Maya showed that point very clearly. Even in the constituency where the Ayodhya temple is situated, even there he got defeated. The BJP candidate got defeated. That was meant to be almost a kind of it was supposed to encapsulate the whole process of a Hinduization and a modification, if you like, of Indian society. The fact is that there was a massive revolt, and that's despite the fact that there's been this very spectacular development of the Indian economy. The point is, though, as Maya said, that development of the economy has not touched the issue of unemployment and youth unemployment. If you take the population between, I think it's 20 and 25, nearly 50% of that age group are unemployed. It's a massive what can we say, infection in Indian society, and it's a ticking time bomb too, because if you have millions of and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people unemployed on the street, young people particularly, with no future, with no hope, then that's a very, very, very destabilizing and explosive factor. Now, all that is missing, I think, is this question of a leadership, and I think Maya also brought that out very clearly. But what do we see of the working class, even without a leadership, what they've achieved? First of all, this absolutely decisive repudiation of the Modi program. He's been humiliated. He not far from not being able to oppose his Hindu theocratic constitution, he has not even got a majority. He's dependent on allies, and very unstable and very, very fickle allies. And I think I would like to know what Maya thinks, but it seems to me very likely that that the Modi government could collapse when one or other of those parties pulls the plug. Just on this question that Finn raised about the Samajwadi Party, I don't think we should read too much into the fact that they used the name socialist. Every party up until recently was using the term socialist. I think even the BJP at the time toyed with it. It's just it's part of the charade, and I don't think that's the point. But what we do see is that the working class does have a history. It did have a very strong workers' organisation, workers' party. But the problem is that again and again and again, the working class was betrayed. It was, first of all, it built the Communist Party, and the Communist Party utterly betrayed it, stabbed it in the back. Particularly in during the time of the Second World War, when the CPI switched overnight from a policy of opposing the war to a policy of supporting British imperialism. And they called off the struggle, and they refused to give any support to the independence struggle during the course of the war. And they were actually cynically used by the British administration in order to break up Congress meetings, to help to repress, even in some cases assassinate Congress leaders and all the rest of it, because Congress was putting up at least a token resistance to the British Raj, and the CPI never really recovered from that. And then later the CPI split, and then we saw a completely farcical pantomime situation where there were two communist parties, each of them desperately making alliances with this or that section of a reactionary ruling class, where the CPI allied itself with Congress, which was completely corrupt and which had just emerged from imposing a dictatorship during the emergency period in the late 1970s. And then there was the CPIM, which made a bloc, an alliance with really the forerunners of the BJP, the Jana Sangh and other bourgeois parties, which had actually, in many cases, been resisted even the liberation movement of the 1940s. I would like to go further into that, but there's obviously no time for that. But what we have to realise now is that there is no workers' party. The Communist Party split again and again and again. The CPI and the CPIM have just little pockets in Kerala and not really far else. The so-called CPIML, which completely abandoned the working class and indulged in peasant guerrilla, what should we call it? Activities, shall we say? But in they've split now into 23 different fragments and so on. The working class is crying out for political representation, and there is not one now. But nevertheless, I was surprised to hear Maya say that the working class, that the strikes have been isolated and fragmented and all the rest of it. The point is that for 4 or 5 times in the last 5 years or so, or 8 or 9 years, 4 or 5 times during that period, we've seen general strikes, token general strikes, it's true, 1-day strikes, 2-day strikes, but they have involved 25 crores, 250 million workers, by far and away the biggest strikes in world history. It represents, I think, 1 in 30 of the world population who were on strike in those times. Now, I know that was very much manipulated from on top, that they switched these strikes on and off simply as to let off steam and all the rest of it. And I'm not trying to, and we're always being accused of being over-optimistic. And I mean, I, for one, I'm not particularly optimistic in the sense, I mean, the working class may triumph and it may be defeated. But the point is, we have to point out what are the possibilities and what is the potential. And the point is, those 1 and 2 day token general strikes show that there is a thirst and a real absolute craving on the part of the working class to show their strength and to fight back. And it's a crime that the trade union leaders and the leaders of the political parties are not giving any vent to that. The point is, the workers need a party. They need a party of their own. The BJP is a completely corrupt party, which is playing with communalism in order to brutally repress and divide the working class. Congress, again, it was in power for 4 or 5 decades, unbroken rule, and it was again thoroughly steeped in corruption of the worst kind, and it pretended and played with the ideas of democracy and of anti-communal politics and so on. But in fact, they played equally just as the BJP did. They paid when it came to it with anti-Sikh pogroms. Thousands of Sikhs were murdered under the rule of Rajiv Gandhi after the death of Indira Gandhi. They played with communal riots against Muslims during their period of office. The wave of communal pogroms that swept India in the early 90s after the destruction of the Babri Masjid Mosque at the site of what is now the Ayodhya Temple, that took place under the Congress regime. They did not interfere when the BJP was inflicting, again, deaths of thousands of people, most horrific ethnic cleansing, which took place in Mumbai and in the north and throughout in all of that. So the possibilities are there, but it really is the need of the hour in India, as everywhere. The need is now to build parties based on those traditions of struggle and of unity, and I think there are ample opportunities in India to be able to move towards that. So I'll say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Dominic, did you want to speak now?
Yeah, I think after Roger, it might sound a bit simplistic, but I think the basic thing you've got to start talking about with capitalist democracy is it's not democracy. It's for the masses. It's democracy for the capitalists. They've set up a regime of parliamentary democracy, which ensures their continuation. If the Labour movement took over Parliament and wanted to transform society, in every country in the world, there are measures that will be taken to dispose of that Parliament, to pass power to the President, the King or the Queen or whoever they choose, to overturn it and ensure that the forces of the state are used to suppress it. But that doesn't mean to say that you don't take part in the Parliament. I think the point about the parliamentary democracy and participating in it is to expose the very nature of the parliamentary democracy and raise the question of the workers' voice, the workers' need for their own organisations. The working class can't use the machinery of capitalism to defeat capitalism. It has to overturn that and create its own organisations. And I think it's the same question with strikes. The most important thing about a strike is it raises the question of the workers organising together to fight the capitalists. And that's like a beacon to other workers. Obviously, a successful strike burns that beacon a lot brighter. But the fact that people have organised together shows that there are means of fighting capitalism. There are means of taking on the employer, and it's not a question of total despair. And I think these are very simple points that we have to make. And that's how workers' organisations will be built, by recognising the system you're fighting, by recognising that it's only through working class unity and action that you can take them on. There's no other means. Terrorism and all the rest of it is an absolute disaster as far as the class struggle is concerned. So I think those are just a couple of simple points I wanted to make.
Thank you, Dominic. I just want to mention again at this point, there's quite a few Indian comrades here, and it'd be very useful and educational for the rest of us to hear their experiences and their analysis of what's actually happening in their country. So they'd obviously get precedence. So if an Indian comrade wants to speak, they get priority. There's a shortage of other comrades who are indicating that they want to speak. So I'm making a particular appeal to Indian comrades to fill out some of the points that are being raised in the discussion. And obviously, any other comrade that wants to speak is free and welcome to do so. This is unusual for WIN meetings. What normally happens is there are more speakers than we can accommodate in the time available. This is unusual, this reluctance. And it's not due to shyness, I can assure you. So.
Ben, can I respond to the two sets of comments, second round?
Yes, okay, Maya, go ahead.
Okay. So the thing is that, I do see that many of us here are in many ways birds of the same flock. We fly together. There is, an agreement on many points. But of course, I think the differences do exist in the prognosis, and I think we need to deliberate on those, difference of opinions, and I think there's scope for that. So I'll just clarify and reassert certain points that I have made. If we take this issue of what revolutionary left should be doing, I mean, what's the strategy of the left? My point is that there has been a long critique. All of us have witnessed this in our own experiences of being part of movements and organizations. There has long existed a history, in the case of my country, 75 years plus experience to draw on, of a critique, a formidable critique of the parliamentary system, as it existed, representative democracy. But the point is, where is the alternative? So it's not enough, the point is that the intervention can't stop at, the fact that there is this critique of the system, that it is, that the critique is advanced and developed, and of course influenced also, the public opinion, because as I said, in so many elections, and I've quoted from 1951 onwards, the majority is always voting for change, and it's very critical of governments that come to power. But the point is that the left, has not been able to tap, that anger, those aspirations of the common people, especially the laboring masses, to be able to construct the alternative. And I think that's what we need to be discussing now. There has been enough critique, and a lot of it has come out also in today's meeting, of what is, what we call bourgeois democracy. But where's the alternative? Where's the projected alternative and the actual building of that alternative? And that's what the left needs to do right now. This is not a story peculiar to India. I think every country sees this happening. People are slammed with the continuity of regimes which they've actually voted for and have not voted for and don't have confidence in. So, this is I think it's a worldwide, a problem. And therefore, the need for the left, the revolutionary left, to build that alternative form of democracy. And that will come from movements in the ground. That will come from rethinking your interventions in the movements of the ground. And as I just, a few minutes back said, where will we anchor? Where, for example, will the Indian left anchor its interventions within the very segmented labor market in India? Is it going to come from the most exploited section and their issues being at the center of, the struggle and the rethinking of all India movements? Or is it going to be just one demand amongst hundreds in, central trade union, bureaucratic trade unions, long list of charter of demands? It's not enough just to flag it, but it's more important to make it the epicenter of the movement moving forward, right? So that's the difference, I think, that I was, pointing to, it to actually help the left, therefore, reconfigure, the way in which the working class is also, constituted, its demands are, getting articulated, and the alternative form of democracy then becomes, more possible, more within the horizon, rather than just the critique of what we see as, the rule of capital and the kind of bourgeois representative democracy it nurtures. I would say the fight, therefore, has to be brought to the format of democracy as it exists. That fight has to be brought to the format, and not just working within the given paradigm of representative electoral democracy. The format has to be our concern now. And I would say the second point of difference that I could see is with respect to fascism. Comrade's point is that, what I'm saying is, and I'm speaking from specificities, when I'm making a distinction between the political phenomena of totalitarianism as we've seen it in certain parts of the world, which you use the terms fascism to describe, I'm saying that that's not necessarily going to help us understand what's been brewing in India for close to 100 years, and what I call Sanghism I actually see what's happening in the form of Sanghism getting entrenched in India, a more advanced form of totalitarianism compared to fascism. I mean, where did we see 100-year window for, you know, something like this to brew within the kind of fascism we're talking about, you know, during the interwar period? And the RSS in India is going to celebrate its 100th year very soon. And they've developed their base, as I said, you know, you do not see that kind of tentacles being built amongst civil society, amongst the larger social space, the way we're seeing it in Sanghism. You don't see it in the case of historically speaking, in the case of fascism. That is why my wariness to use that as a blanket term concept for what we're seeing here unfold. I'd see Sanghism as not only a more advanced form of totalitarian compared to fascism, I see it as a more dangerous form, And that is why I'm making this distinction. You know, and I'll say it's working in such ways that we've not seen fascism work in earlier, in other contexts. You know, they're in the position of, they're in a position and they're also fighting a position. For example, I'd said, they spread their tentacles. They've used the last 100 years to do so. They're in the student, they've infiltrated the student movement, what is known as the ABVP, which is the right-wing RSS BJP-backed student front. Its government, its parent parties in power. There is this whole youth protest taking place in India as we speak against centralized all India examinations for, prestigious professional courses in highest education. And it's known as the NEET exam, NEET. The same government which has been exposed for its corruption in organizing the NEET exam, its student wing, the ABVP, is also coming to those protests, saying, roll back the NEET exam. NEET is wrong. Students don't want this. So, you can see the way they're functioning and the way they've also, developed their base amongst the civil society or larger social space is not matched by what we have seen in the case of fascism. And therefore, I think that's why many of us, want to think in terms of the working class movement strategy in a very different format. Because, the problem is in the current format of democracy, there is so much scope available for Sanghism to keep consolidating itself and pushing back the actual potential of the revolutionary working class movement. So, I would say that, in terms of, it's the only Gramscian force. I really see it as the only Gramscian, force or party in India is the RSS in real terms. And, ironically, I'd say ironically, they, before capturing the state, have actually captured the social space, civil society. And therefore, as I said, I literally see that, what Gramsci identified, it's actually that the party we're talking about in Gramscian terms is the RSS. And that's why I'm making this, distinction between Sanghism and fascism. Of course, it's all in an ironical zest, but I think it just helps prove what I'm talking about, the specificities of what's happening here and unfolding.
Thank you, Maya. The floor is still open for comrades who want to contribute. We can't labour the point. If comrades don't want to speak, and I think it would be great if Indian comrades could help us to understand the issue more deeply based on their experiences, but we can't force this point. So if there are no other comrades to speak, indicating they wish to speak.
It's a comrade who's asking me to actually spell out what I mean. Is it Sanghism? No, it's Sanghism, coming from the terminology Rashtra Swayam Sevak Sangh. That's their organization.
Okay. Well, I was going to suggest, Maya, in the absence of further contributions, do you want to make a final summary of how the discussion has gone and lessons that we might take away from the meeting? Do you want to do kind of a wrap up of the meeting?
No, sure. I think I've already elaborated and reasserted many things.
Yes, you have.
So
You've spoken very well and very clearly. Okay. So then we'll have we'll move on a second to discuss next week's meeting. But I want to thank Maya once again for a very informative, very interesting discussion, and the additional points that she made during the discussion will contribute quite a bit to our
And
understanding.
Jimmy's got his hand up.
Yeah,
is
I
it?
just tried to shout that. Jimmy's waving
Yeah.
at you.
Oh, sorry,
So-
Jimmy. I
Yeah,
didn't
sorry,
see-
and it's
yeah.
not, it's problem my end.
Oh, I didn't know.
I can't
Go
get
ahead.
the mouse or the.
Anyway, you're on now,
problem.
Jimmy, so go ahead.
Anyway, I have a question for Maya and the other comrades. It's in relation to the development of Indian technology and industry. For the last couple of years, I've worked in plastics processing industry, where a lot of the equipment came from India. Now, it was always a fascinating thing to watch, because a lot of the machines themselves had the most sophisticated modern electronic and computerized technology, but it was generally mounted on a framework, heavy cast iron framework, a technology probably 100, 200, 300 years old. And it had a beautiful position of being able to fuse the technologies of different generations. But the curiosity that I have with it is whether or not Indian industry in general is an indigenous industry based on families, on communities, on local capital, or whether it is based on international capital. Because if it's based on the domestic capital and the domestic technology and the domestic training, I can salute it. But in that saluting, we also raised the question of whether the workers in those industries tend to be organized in trade unions in the local manufacture, in the indigenous manufacture, compared with the multinationals, are the workers organized there. And by that I mean the manufacturing, the manual workers, the people who do the heavy lifting. Is there a division in the organization, in trade unions? And particularly, are there any interventions or programs by the trade unions to organize young workers, to organize apprentices, to organize the training, education, and transfer and development of skills of the youth? Do the unions play any active role in that dimension?
Thanks for that question, Jimmy. Does anybody, including Maya, anybody want to take that issue up that Jimmy has raised? Okay. Are you still with us there, Maya?
Roger of Finn, could you explain the crux of what Comrade Jimmy was asking me? Because I think I've lost internet in the middle. It was wavering, so his voice broke. Could you give me the crux of what he was asking, Comrade Jimmy?
Yeah, Jimmy, could you summarize it there?
Yeah, the key question, the core question, is that it's obvious that in the last generation or so, India has developed massive industrial and technological advances and is now a major player of the world market. In the organizing and the development of the industry, are the youth in particular who are providing the skills and providing the labor to create this new industry? Does the trade union movement have an active and conscious program to intervene with the youth, to develop the youth? And are the unions playing any active role in influencing their education along the line, on a class line? And also, do they play any role in the planning of the development of the skills of the working class, and particularly the youth?
Is that okay, Maya, with it now? Maya?
Yes, I'm just trying to make some connections with, when responding to Comrade Jimmy, with some of the, reflections I've already laid out. So just taking this question of, certain kind of upgradation, development of certain kind of technology within the production process. Now the point is, and I mean, and what does that imply in terms of workers' politics and issues? Broadly, I think that's what I've understood. I may be wrong, but I'll just quickly say that in India, in this part of the world, cheap labor is so readily available, and what we're seeing is that for many capitalists, it's more profitable to in fact not invest in a certain amount of technological upgradation of the production process. In fact, what benefits, and this is also a phenomena in the Indian economy, is dwarfism. We see a lot of the trend of dwarfism, which is that you have small micro enterprises taking a bulk of or managing a bulk of production in the Indian economy. And of course, what this means is that for a large chunk of Indian capitalists here, you exploit, in fact, what I'd say overexploit, cheaply available Indian labor, and actually delay, postpone, or steer away from advancement, technological upgradation of your production process, and which is why we see a very peculiar situation here in India, where we're sending the Chandrayaan to the moon, so we have that level of technological development taking place and being advertised aggressively by the regime, the ruling regime. And the same country, at the same time that it's sending and developing space research and etc., is a country where the sewage, a sewer, and the sewage system is still cleaned by stigmatized manual labor. Okay, and therefore, just connecting it to my my larger point and reflection in this meeting. Hence, for the revolutionary left movement, it is about organizing that section of stigmatized, most vulnerable, overexploited sections of worker, which actually helps bridge that gap between their overexploitation and the average rate of exploitation. That segment of the of the working class that's organized, that gap between the average rate of exploitation and their own overexploitation reduces, and that is a very crucial set of struggles that the left needs to anchor itself in and take forward and develop further, because those are the struggles that actually become truly truly the way forward, and they provide the scope for what I'd say really a major attack on the functioning of capital here in India. And it'll become this segment of the workforce would be the social base of the new revolutionary left party.
Thanks, Maya. I want to thank all the comrades who contributed in raising the level of discussion and pursuing the examination of issues. It's worth mentioning also that the principal function that the Workers' International Network sets itself is assisting in the building of working class revolutionary organizations in the countries in which we're involved. So the issues and discussions which we're having are all relevant to creating a base for building a Marxist movement around a Marxist program, not just in one specific country, but across the globe, to create a Workers' International. So it's been a very useful discussion. I want to thank the Indian comrades in particular for their attendance at the meeting. And I want to thank again Maya for her illuminating and interesting points that she's made, and all the other comrades similarly who spoke. So with that, just ask Roger if he wants to say something about the meeting of the Workers' International Network next Sunday.
Right, thanks, comrade. First of all, I want to say it's really, really good to see so many Indian comrades participating today. I know that some of them are on our mailing list already, but can I invite any comrades who want to sign up and join our mailing list so that you get notice of future meetings. The Workers' International Network meets every Sunday at the same time. We've been meeting for about 4.5 years now, week after week, discussing the struggles of the working class in one country after another, and we've built up a big network of comrades who participate. So if you would like to join, we advertise our meetings through email. We also have a website, and we also there are recordings of all our meetings on YouTube. But if you would like to get notification of future meetings, could you please put your email address in the chat? Put it in my box, the Workers' International Network box on the chat list. So please just put your email addresses and we'll add you to the mailing list. The next thing is I would like to also invite comrades to have a look at the document which Win produced, a statement that we produced a couple of weeks ago following the results of the Indian election. If you'd like to read our longer article on the issues raised by that, it's on our website, the Workers' International Network website. You'll find it, and you'll also find a link to it on the notice that went out for this meeting. Next week, we'll be discussing the results of another important election. This time, the British general election. The British general election is taking place this Thursday, and so on Sunday we'll be having an open forum discussion on the implications of the results of the election, what comes next, what working class militants need to do, how to organise, what conclusions we can draw, etc. And the week after that, we'll be discussing the election results in France, which again is going to be probably a real turning point in European history. So I invite comrades, as I say, to send their email addresses, put their email addresses in the relevant box, and you're very welcome to attend and participate in all future meetings. Thanks, comrades.
Okay, comrades. Thank you again for your attendance. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Moya. Thank you very much.
Roger, would it be possible to get a recording?
I'm sorry?
Would it be possible to get the link to the recording?
Yeah, the link to the recordings will be on the Win notices that go out. It'll take, well, probably by tomorrow the recording will be up.
This will be on later today. Can you just stop it if we're talking about other things?
Right, by tomorrow. Yeah.
No, it'll be on in a bit, but if you can just stop the recording, because this is all get recorded.
Right. Okay, thanks, comrades.